Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Teach Better Teams Build a Grid series that we are doing every single morning, Monday through Friday this week. We are closing out the week and we are going to be building a writing grid this morning. We are so excited to get into this. As you guys know, we've been building a grid every single day this week with different subject areas. Writing is some of my favorite subjects to be talking about, so I'm so excited to be here. Please make sure you're filling up your coffee. Feel free to grab a notepad if you want to take notes. And I will be sharing all of our stuff on screen. So if you're listening to this after the fact on Teach Better Talk podcast, don't forget you can catch these videos so you can see the whole experience yourself on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or Twitch. So and we're saving it in the Academy too. So head over to teachbetteracademy.com and you'll see it there. We're going to be right back with a little intro and then we'll get started with some of the fun. Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year's Eve. Marie, how are you?
I'm awesome. I'm awesome. Yeah.
I'm so glad you're awesome. And I'm so excited that we get to be together on New Year's Eve to kind of like wrap up this series. It's been fun to build a grid all week long, but I really love building writing grids. So I think we're going to have a wonderful, wonderful discussion here. For our community that may not know you, which seems so strange because you're super active all over, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you teach? What do you do in education? All that jazz.
Yeah, my name is Marie McCumber. I teach at the Ohio State School for the Blind. I teach 5th grade currently, but I'm an elementary teacher. I could teach anywhere, K through 6 in there. But I've been teaching 5th grade now. This is my 2nd year at it. It's awesome experience. All the kids in the school have a visual impairment of some degree. And so it's a really awesome, challenging dream job that I get to work every day. But I've been in education. This is my 14th year as an educator. I worked as a multiple disabilities and low incidence teacher before settling here.
I have so many educators that are considering the grid method or unsure if it's going to fit their classroom because there's this perceived understanding that it's only for those super high achieving kids that have everything going for them, that have support parents at home and everything else. And I love that we're going to be able to dive into all these different opportunities all week long. We've been able to build different subject areas and model so many different differentiation components of the grid method for all students to be successful and just kill it in the classroom. And now we get to talk about visually impaired students, which I don't think I've ever gotten to work. Well, that's not true. I think I've had a few students in my career that had that area, and I can't imagine having a whole classroom of students that all have that visual impairment. Will you tell me a little bit more about how you support those students?
Yeah, so my classroom is very dynamic. So if you I have a full classroom. I've had considered a full classroom of 8 students. So before anybody laughs at me, because they're like, it's cute, you have 8. I have 8 students who all have varying degrees of visual impairment. So, and I have a standard dynamic in that classroom. So if you think about kind of the typical percentages that you might see in a classroom, you have maybe 30% that's kind of behind or missing some skills, and you have 30% that's above everybody else. And then you have that kind of, no, that's not 60. See, my brain's not working yet. Like 40% is in there. That's kind of, quote unquote average, or where they should be, right? Which is the whole other, we could have a whole other, we'll just sidestep that whole thing. But, I have that dynamic in my classroom. On top of that, Of my 8 students, 6 are Braille learners. 5 are dual media, which means they read both print and Braille. And everyone is on a different level on print and or Braille. So, like I have one of my students, he reads at an 8th grade level, in 5th grade, in print, but he's losing his vision. So he has to learn Braille, and he's at a middle of kindergarten level in Braille. And so I have to teach both of his levels in my classroom in the area of reading. So it's like teaching 2 students.
Yeah.
In that content area, and to praise the grid, right? When you everyone needs to go and watch Liv's reading one, because I was a very much like, I just don't know how this is going to work in my classroom. I've got 8 students and 16 different reading levels. And I'm like, I have no idea how to make this work. And I do a guided reading structure, all this. And I was like, oh, yeah, that makes total sense. That, yeah, it totally works. And I need to redo my reading instruction now. But but that's all about being better, right? Like,
I love it.
yeah.
You guys all need to go catch Liv's episode. Was earlier this week on Tuesday with the one and only Grid Method creator, Chad Ostrowski. I just feel like every single conversation this week, and I know that we are focusing on a writing grid, which we're going to get to, but Marie, it is interesting. Like, we're obviously the last grid that we're building this week specifically. And as you look through every single morning conversation where we built a grid in a different subject area, had a different focus, a different conversation, and there was something to be learned, whether you do that subject area or not as a classroom teacher. So I've loved Liv's was a perfect example. I think reading grids are some of the most challenging grids for me to build because it wasn't something that I've had years and years and years of practice in my own personal classroom. I only use the grid method in math, science, and writing. And so sometimes building a grid in a subject area that I didn't personally teach is a little bit more challenging. And then I'm watching this grid on Tuesday and I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally get it. Why don't I explain it that way?
I've never built a reading grid because, and I love grids and I'm a huge fan of them. And I really think everyone should at least look at this method, and I myself, I was like, it's not going to work for me. I didn't even try. Like, I didn't even try to go there. Right. And so I was watching that and I'm like, yes, this is actually what I need to be doing in order to and because I've always been a huge advocate of exposing our kids with disabilities to grade level standards. Not catering to their perceived level, but at least exposing them to what is going on with their typically developing peers. And so I'm like, this is how I reach 5th grade standards when my kids are reading at a 3rd grade level. And yeah, I got really pumped up after the reading one.
Well, I am so glad you got pumped up, and today is going to be just as phenomenal because we get to talk about a writing grid. And I do have to tell you, it has been on my bucket list, but every time I talk to you, I get this reminder that it is on my bucket list. I am dying to come to your classroom. I would love to be around students who can show me Braille and all the incredible things that I'm confident you do to support those kiddos every single day. I just think you have the coolest job. I know that we're all educators and like every single educator has something that's incredible about their work, but holy cow, I just have never been exposed to a visually impaired classroom that utilizes Braille. I would love to just be in that environment, soak all that in. I bet there's just so much laughter and so many incredible learning opportunities that students are presented with. So I think it's so cool.
We do a lot. I have an open door policy. Now, COVID is not so open door, but we do have an open door policy. I always love to invite people into my classroom, so they can see, blindness and visual impairments is low incidence disability. It's not something you encounter every day. And so there is a lot of preconceived notions, a lot of myths surrounding the disability and the people that have that disability. So yeah, they're regular kids who try to tell me they can't log into Google, but I'm like, I saw your TikTok video last night. So I think you can figure out how to log into Google. Like
I love it. I so love it. And that's just kids, right? Like every single classroom
Mhm.
has had that problem. That's just kids. I love this. So this morning we get to do a writing grid, and I want to know a little bit about you as a writing teacher before we get started. You actually have done a ton of work ahead of time. So I'm going to share my screen in a few minutes. We'll be able to kind of dive into what you're working with and kind of where we're headed. But why writing? Why is that an area that you want to use the grid for?
So I am a writer. I consider myself a writer. But I was a little bit at a loss on how to teach writing at kind of a higher level, basically more than, teaching children how to string together sentences and paragraphs on maybe, say, an AAC device, and different ways of doing that. So, when I got fifth grade, I was really excited, but I was very intimidated because I'm like, I don't know how to teach writing. um, so I bought a curriculum, which is units of study, which it's probably 50-50 people are familiar with it. Units of study is a pretty rigorous curriculum, honestly, but it's very scaffolded and straightforward. I used it at a previous school when I supported a teacher in the classroom. And so I bought it because it was the one I was familiar with, honestly. And I saw really cool results from kids writing. The issue I've run into, though, is that an area of growth for myself is I really want to understand fifth grade standards better. Um, as a intervention specialist, especially in multiple disabilities, you tend to look at the standards in this bigger umbrella, this more vertical space, instead of focusing right here. And I still look at it, I still like to do a fourth and sixth to see the vertical alignment of it. However, as an intervention specialist, you're not expected to be a master of the standards. You are to have a knowledge of the standards, but you are to be a master of accommodating and modifying them, and gaining access. So my growth this year, I really wanted to be like, I really want to learn these standards and understand them. And so my goal for myself was to create more standards-based teaching and standards-based grading.
Yeah.
And for me, I honestly, building the writing grid was really appealing to me because I'm like, oh, writing is so huge. It's so huge, right? Because the end product is write something, like
Yeah.
write a narrative, write an opinion piece. And the biggest one, and I chose this one because I'm like, this is the biggest one for my kids. Write, basically a nonfiction, research something and write about it.
Yeah.
And my kids come in and they kind of give me a blank stare, right? All of them are behind in writing, due to their visual impairment. All of them are behind in their writing. So getting them to create a fifth grade level piece is a really big ask of them. Not when I don't think it's unattainable. And I always tell them that. I said, you can do this. But I also tell them, I said, but I do know it's a big ask of you. And
Well,
so,
and let's look at these standards because I know you've gone through why you chose this section. Tell me a little bit because as we're looking here, and I know we're sharing our screen now, you did such a wonderful job. You chose standards that you really felt like were our main standards. You labeled them as main, and then you have related standards here, which I that is so appropriate for a writing grid. So
yeah.
tell me a little bit about what these standards are asking of our students.
Yeah. So the main one is writing an informative explanatory text
Mhm.
to examine a topic. And, in all that, it's introducing a topic, grouping your information logically, linking ideas, using vocabulary, provide a concluding statement to it, um, which is huge. I know as an adult, if somebody asked me to do that like right now, I might be like, okay.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm asking like 10 through 12-year-olds to do that. The second one I put in our technology instruction. All of our students in the school get assistive technology instruction as part of having visual impairment.
Sure.
So our technology instruction is actually infused in our writing time.
Sure.
Um, and so another main standard, because it occurs at the same time, is using technology, which does relate also to do research,
Sure.
to publish writing. All of our writing is done in Google Classroom, in Google Docs, and for all of our students, Braille and print. And so putting that technology piece in there, and then conduct short research projects, which in order to do an informative writing, you have to do a short research project
Yep.
to put it in there. And so then the related standards are the things we hit every time we work on writing.
Yep.
Producing clear and coherent writing, develop and strengthen writing is needed, and recalling relevant information from experiences. All that past stuff that we've been working on all year is going to come into play with this, in both writing and technology.
And so, as you chose these standards, which I think work together beautifully, I love that we are able to model a grid that has so many different pieces. You, by saying that these are the main standards, are really going to focus on these, but you might also evaluate these as you go, which is really important for you to acknowledge that these are going to be incorporated into the space that we're working within.
Mhm.
You then went through and you looked at targets. And I love that you created your targets already. I think that was so wonderful. I want to go through these, but as we look at our standards right before we get into our targets, especially the main standards, where do we feel like these are falling on our level of DOK? And the reason I always like to focus on that right off the bat with a standard is when we know where that minimum expectation is, where is our grid? I'm sorry, where is our standard written at? What level, what depth of knowledge? We're going to help us figure out where in the grid the minimum expectation is for our students to complete. It's a common misconception that students need to go through the entire grid. That doesn't actually provide the differentiation we're looking for. What we want to do is we want to identify the depth of knowledge of the standard, and then that level is essentially where our minimum hope is that our students can get to so they can meet the standard that we are working towards. Anything above that would be enrichment. Anything below that would be scaffolding towards learning. So,
Mhm.
or scaffolding towards mastery. So tell me a little bit about where these standards fall.
So I rated the main one, I guess, if you want to say that, is producing a piece of writing. And
Mhm.
for me, that falls in a DOK level 4
Mhm.
because it's create and design.
It
Um,
can. And that I think is a
mhm,
really interesting evaluation. I think that's super common to say that writing falls into a level 4. I think it'll
mhm,
be interesting as we develop. It might be a 3,
okay.
depending on how this goes. So I think it's good to know that when students are actually creating something, they can actually create something at a lower level and
Mhm,
continue to evaluate it at a higher level in level 4. So
okay.
this is gonna be really good. I agree with putting it in 4 for now. We might end up moving it down depending on what your goals are here. So I
Mhm.
like that. Good spot there. What about some of the other standards that you have here? With guidance, that's probably gonna be just throughout, and then
Yeah.
conducting a research project, that's probably just kind of throughout your grid.
Mhm. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So
If
are
I
we
had Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, for the conducting the research project part, like, if I had to put a DOK number on it, I would probably put that in a 3. Because you're taking information, you're really evaluating it, the source of it and the value of the information related to your topic and things like that. And so
No, I think you're in a good spot here with your mindset for sure. As you were creating your targets, did you struggle with these at all? How did you feel? I mean, you have so many statements here. That is wonderful. I love that also we're modeling that you can have multiple targets in a section. At the very end, you might find a really creative way to put these all into 1 or 2 targets. I
Mhm.
actually never feel that strongly that that needs to be the case. I know many people have different opinions on that. I like having them chunked out. I like being able to go through and say, yep, did this one, yep, did this one, and kind of have simple statements that I can look at and say yes to all versus really robust 2 or 3 sentence targets that have a lot in them. So, how did you feel about making these targets?
Yeah, because my students come in behind,
Mhm.
I want to give as much support and as much scaffolding as I can.
Mhm.
So I tend to be the same way. I tend to chunk it out, right? Instead of having obviously at the end, we'll see at the end, I have this big long sentence, but, at the beginning, you know, my students might have zero experience doing this coming into my classroom. And so I really want to piece out bit by bit what they're doing,
Mhm.
um, so that um, so that I'm sure that they have a really solid foundation
Mhm.
before moving forward. And I think that's a very class by class basis. Um, However, this is tend to this it I tend to start here. Um, with I like to give as much support as possible, and then I pre-assess, and then I move them, where they need to go. But if I'm just starting cold, we're gonna start ground level so that I know you have the foundation moving forward, and I'm not making assumptions about what you know or even what you remember from
Yes.
experiences.
So,
Um,
Marie, it's really interesting because I think that your targets are so well structured. I love that you kind of did the what, the why, the when of all the pieces that you want them to understand. I am going to skip really quick just to talk about a few ways that you can
mhm,
structure a writing grid that I've seen successful. So I'm going to skip all the other stuff, which I know I'm breaking all the rules right now.
I love
And
it.
what I want us to look at is we have some options here. You've
Mhm,
created really, really beautifully chunked out targets for each level. And essentially, we might end up choosing to put all those targets in here and essentially just beautifully structure them within the level that, every box might satisfy a target depending
mhm,
on how these targets are written, how comfortable you are with the system that you've gone through. You might actually be closer than you think to being done with this grid because you've chunked your target so beautifully. The other just mindset that I want to present is not one that we even need to use. It's one that we can blend with other things. But I just want to go over a simple way that I think a lot of writing teachers might consider structuring your grid. Is that okay if we talk about that real quick?
absolutely, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So when we're looking at a grid for writing, there's a lot of different ways that we can do this. One of the ways that I have found a lot of success, especially if you're stuck on a grid, which I don't necessarily consider you stuck at all at this point, is looking at the grid really to help guide the writing process and model again all the background knowledge that you hope students come in with. You're really solidifying that in level 1, which you identified as something you want to focus on as well.
Mhm,
So looking at a grid for writing, and I know that we're looking at informational text right now. I usually look at that level 1 to be basing that background knowledge on giving students the opportunity to see what's coming for them, but the type of activities we're providing are at a low level. There's this common misconception that at a low level, they're only being exposed to low level content. That's not actually having to be the case,
mhm,
especially in a writing and reading grid and in other subject areas as well. We don't only have to focus on vocabulary, which is really common. And I know we modeled that yesterday a lot. Your level 1 content can be exposing them to really rich text, but only asking the student to understand that information at a level 1 depth of knowledge. So, for example, it is very common in a writing grid to have level 1 be exposing the student to all the types of elements that they're going to find in their writing piece. So for an example that's unrelated to ours, if you were having a student write an argumentative essay, you can expose them to how to write a thesis. You can expose them to really rich sentences that model thesis writing and really wonderful thesis statements to use. But then the type of question that we're going to ask the student is maybe only to identify something about that statement. So they're not writing their own thesis at this point in time, but they're able to be exposed to that really rich content. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's a lot that we can do here with yours as well, where you might be giving them examples and text that is really showing them where they're heading in level 1. But really what you're asking them to do at the end of that exposure to those learning opportunities is just to simply identify pieces so that they're slowly building on that background knowledge. Mm-hmm. And level 2, then, it's really common to actually start the writing process, but you're doing it in that really beautiful chunked out session where you're looking at, you could even actually consider starting your research project in level 2 by having students work through identifying the topic, going through what type of research, how you want them to go about research, having them begin those things. And then as they collect the research at that lower level, then at the higher level, like in level 3, that's where they're analyzing their research. That's how they're actually looking at taking their research and putting it into a sentence or putting it into a structure. So that way the research doesn't have to be conducted all the way at the end, but throughout the grid, throughout the writing process, they can be doing these high level skills, but slowly building on those skills by analyzing them, interpreting them, and then creating new with those skills as the grid builds. The other thing that I've seen then is that at level 3, a student can be putting those pieces together, really constructing their writing piece. At the end of level 3, we can really see students, depending on the type of writing they're looking at, having kind of a final product, but it's more or less a final product that they still have so much analyzing and evaluating they can have. And then level 4 is very common to have if you're looking at peer editing, that's a really beautiful thing to look at in level 4 because they've not only created something, but now they're analyzing it, they're giving feedback on it, and they're making adjustments to it, which is a really higher level as well. So depending on how we want to do this, I just want to go through that because if you have anybody listening right now that is not necessarily looking at an informative writing piece or anything else, that rule of thumb is just a simple format that we can structure our grids in at any type of level for a writing grid to kind of see that writing progression, which does allow for our students to possibly meet those minimum expectations at the end of level 3, but then really get into the deep element of writing, of diving into the content and really maybe even evaluating other people's work at that level 4, which is again at a higher level of that reflection. So depending on where we're headed, I just want to give us that perspective for sure. As now we are
change everything.
Oh, go ahead. What were you saying?
I said now I want to change everything.
Well, and I think it's interesting. We just might end up changing some of your targets purely not because your targets are in any way incorrect, but because you might end up deciding that other targets might exist in other spaces. So looking at your targets, I'd love to go through some of the work that you've done. It looks like in this first section, you're using the word identify a lot, which again is very similar to what I was talking about. But just because a student is identifying something doesn't mean you're not exposing them to more. They just are identifying when you're looking at what you're actually asking them to do with the material, which I really like in your targets here. I can identify what a research or explanatory essay is. That is a great target. That doesn't mean that you're just giving them a simple prompt to be able to do that. You can get really deep within that in that first section. But then at the very end, when you're looking to evaluate the student's understanding, again, you're just asking them to identify what that is, which is a really great prompt for us to work with in that first level. When you're looking at your targets for level 2 and level 3, we're seeing our vocabulary change in our targets. You're getting into explain and summarize and compare. I think these targets are going to work for us really well as we build our grid. We just might end up tweaking things just slightly as we go. As we grab these, I would love to see you copy and paste your targets below in our grid. We're going to skip our questions for now. And I think we're going to go back to those. I think it might be good with your targets to actually put them right into the grid and get working. Do you want to copy and paste your targets into your sections here? And we can start looking at how you might want to structure this?
Yeah.
Awesome. We're seeing some good comments so far. Sorry, guys, I'm going to review those as she's copying and pasting. Alex is saying, Ray, your scaffolding support. Oh, see, I'm glad that I can help. He's looking to hopefully set a goal to do a PD grid. Alex, I see this done all the time. I'd love to see you design a PD grid. That could be a really, really good option for your staff. Brianne is noting that peer review could be in your grid. Absolutely. It's a great higher level thing that you can actually model throughout, but really ask for that rich peer feedback at level 4. You can actually incorporate peer feedback in any level of the grid. Again, when we talk about depth of knowledge, it does not mean that you're not exposing the students to the information. It just means that the type of questions you're asking the student once they've been exposed to that information is at the level we're working on. So you can actually have students work with a peer process of reviewing content, but not actually ask the student to fully create a feedback element that is at that higher level when you're at those lower level concepts. So for example, you can have a student model what peer review looks like and then give them options to simply choose from for their feedback. And again, that is at a lower level because they don't have to create the type of work they're looking at. So I see that you've posted in your targets. Let's start with level 1 here. Looking at your targets, I can identify what the pieces of writing are. Sorry, I'm just lost. Here we go. Perfect.
Sorry.
Good. I can identify why is a really cool why we write research. I love that. Identify when we need to use this. Identify that research is the same as nonfiction text and reading. Perfect. And identify an introduction, conclusion, and thesis statement in research. So it's interesting. You have a lot here, and I think all of this is going to beautifully fit in level 1. We might need to add some boxes because the way that you've changed your targets, I think, can be the way that you chunk it within your grid. When you're looking at these targets, do you feel that one target is easiest to start with?
Probably the what.
Probably the what. I agree.
Because this will be the last type of writing I introduce before we go back, because I do narrative, argumentative, informative, and then I go back to narrative at the end again.
Sure.
And so I think hopefully at this point they can pick it out of a of a lineup.
So I agree. And I think we noted this yesterday, and I know, Marie, that you may not have tuned in yesterday, so I do want to go into this as well. When we think about structuring our learning opportunities, Chad did a wonderful job earlier this week modeling a great way to structure each square, right? Each box is kind of what we're talking about right now. I brought in yesterday a different way that I like to think of each box, and this really has to do with how teachers naturally design their daily lesson planning without the grid. So just for the sake of our conversation, I want to use that model again, just for our friends that maybe didn't watch yesterday, but have watched other grid building this week. I just want to model different ways of teachers being able to structure those boxes, those learning opportunities. So what we said yesterday, Marie, is that we're going to keep this level 1A title right there, but then I'm going to delete the words that are in here that says need and assessment. Instead, I'd like us to think about a 3-part structure where we introduce an idea, where we practice that idea, and then we evaluate the idea.
I love that.
This is how I like to structure my squares. It's not actually different from how Chad likes to do it, but it's a different mindset as we look at those 3 pieces. That allows us to say, okay, at the very top of every single box, we're exposing our students to something new. And then as we expose them to something new, we're going to have them practice or engage in some way with that idea. And then at the end, we're going to confirm in some way, some sort of quick check or opportunity, we're going to confirm understanding. And that's where we get into students only moving on when they have that understanding. So we're going to evaluate the student in some way that they grasp the concept that we're focusing on. So with kind of that focus, those three pieces, if we start with the what, the introducing of the idea literally is the target. Like, what is research? What is an exploratory essay? And so that can be our topic that we focus on in 1A if you want to type that in there.
Yeah. Like type it up here, or do you want it?
Yep, you can do it wherever you want. We're just kind of drafting, so it can be messy.
Okay.
So we can kind of get into how you do that later, but that would be the topic, what we're exposing them to. And then we'll give them some way to practice that. So maybe you give them different types of text to read, and they have to identify, oh, this is a narrative. This isn't a research essay. This is how I know it's a research essay. So you're probably going into what it is and the components of it. And then how we evaluate that could be as simple as giving them 2 pieces of writing to look at. And you really, again, lower level concept, you're really looking at those 2 very rich pieces of writing, and you're saying, point to the one that is the research project and point to the one that's not. Right. And so again, we're asking them a low level concept, still by exposing them to really great examples of writing with those mentor texts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
After the what, looking at your targets, what do you feel like is the next target we can work with?
The why or the when?
I actually wonder if we could put those together. And I don't think we need to, but depending on how you go about teaching it, you might get into the why and the when in a similar manner. So for today, let's put them together. So why are we using something and when is it appropriate? Could be something that, depending on how you teach it, might go perfectly together in one section. Good. Why do we use it? And when do we use it? Perfect. I kind of feel like those might go together. And again, using the same format, we'll introduce that, they'll engage with that content in some way, and then we'll evaluate if they understand that piece. Okay, we've gone through the what, the why, and the when. What's next on our target list that we might want to take on?
Oh, that they are the same as nonfiction text, connecting it to the reading that they're doing as well.
Yes. Do you think that can go in a section we've already done, or do you think that would be an important section to leave separate and have kind of teach that in isolation?
You know, it's funny because I went either way on that. Actually, when I wrote that I can statement, because I'm like, I feel like it's redundant, but at the same time, sometimes if we don't explicitly come out and be like, hey, this is the same as the book you're reading, they might actually completely miss that.
Yeah. And I agree with it being a separate target because of that. And I think that you can evaluate that as we go. That's going to be really important. I think that might be able to go with your what. Okay. It doesn't need to be something that we put there. We can have it be separate. So depending on, what you're looking for, but it could go there because as you model what it is, you might be relating it to other pieces of writing they've read, which is going to allow them to see those connections. I think it's important as a separate target because you're allowing them to see, you're actually giving yourself a focus to make sure that you talk about it with students, which is really important.
I think that's a knowing your class situation.
Yeah.
Most definitely,
Yeah, your other target in here says identify an introduction, conclusion, thesis statement, and research. Yep, for your essay. I actually would break this section up into maybe a few different learning opportunities. So I would actually have them identify an introduction and a conclusion together, and then I would do a thesis statement separate because, again, we're really exposing them to really rich introductions, rich conclusions, and rich thesis statements. That's a lot to go through in one learning opportunity.
Thinking on that was that this should be a review target.
Yeah.
Because we've really introduced and practiced it a lot in the argumentative essay.
True.
However, no, I do agree with you though.
So I would put your introduction conclusion together because those are going to have similar characteristics, especially since it's a review. And then to be honest, I never feel like I need an end. That's not necessarily true. I guess it might be appropriate. And this is a decision for a writing teacher, class by class. Writing teachers might want to have an evaluation at the end of the level to make sure they understood the whole thing. Or depending on how you're building on your skills, you may not feel like you need a level 1 end of level evaluation. You might feel like you're getting that throughout the writing process. So either we want to add a column here so that we can fit in the thesis in a separate space in our level 1 grid, or we can just include it in 1D and not have that end of level 1 evaluation. Where do you feel like you're falling today?
My feeling for this particular one was, I was like, I don't really feel like, I think I'm getting it throughout. Like,
Yes.
I think I'm just kind of checking boxes right now.
Perfect.
Okay, good, you have it. Good, you have it. And I don't know that I really need a kind of a wrap up to that
Perfect.
level necessarily.
No, I totally agree. So what I would do is I would reformat this 1D to look like your 1C, where you're going to go over the thesis, and that will be the last thing in your level 1, is giving them, again, kind of modeling the introduction, conclusion in 1C, and then getting into the thesis in 1D. So they have this full now understanding of what a research concept is and what's included. Good. How do you feel about this level 1?
I love it. I feel
Okay.
great.
Good. We absolutely could have added more boxes if we needed. I want to clarify for those of you that are watching at home, there are 4 boxes here, but I've had grids that have 6 or 7 boxes in level 1, because just like you, Marie, I feel like we kind of keep our mindset very similarly. I love to chunk things out smaller. My mindset is I'd rather have more boxes and more chunk content at the bottom than put too much into each box, too much into a grid.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we absolutely can go back if you feel like going back and wanting to break these apart a little bit more is appropriate. You absolutely can do that later. Getting into our level 2, we've built that foundation. They've been exposed to different pieces of writing. They're really understanding those fundamentals. What do we want to focus on here in level 2? What targets do we feel like we want to dive into next?
Probably explain or summarize.
Okay.
The main idea or the main idea and details, or the summarization, which can also, depending on your class, you could put those together too. My class, I have to chunk them out.
I will tell you, you're getting in here in level 2. It says I can cite sources when completing research. I might want to talk about citing sources in level 1. So because is that something that they've learned in the past before, how to do that?
They've been exposed to it. We haven't really worked on it. I've exposed them to how to do it, but I haven't expected of them yet. How's that?
I might add it in level 1 so you can build on it in level 2. So I know that that's a target we had in level 1 or in level 2. I might add one here. And I'm trying to think. So we're going to go over the basics of research. Then we want to go into the why of research. Then we're kind of getting into in C and D the pieces of research. I think citations belong in the pieces. So I don't know if we want to add it to 1E or if we want to add it and switch some things over, but I'm going to add a column here.
Okay.
And if I were you, I would bring that in. And again, the reason I think so is because citations are a tricky concept.
Yeah.
So you can expose that to them here. I think that that's going to allow them to see, again, just because they've been exposed to it, you can expose them again in level 1 and then move up a little bit. So I don't know if you want to do, I think maybe after you review a thesis, get into what a citation is, why it's important, and have them see an example of citations, right?
Yeah.
Good. Because again, we're more or less modeling what it looks like, how it's used, and then you're just not asking them to do a citation yet, but they can still point to citations and read a paragraph and tell you where in the paragraph they utilized a citation, right? But just by simply identifying where it exists, this would be a great, and I know you have so many different ways that you would evaluate your students, but for my students, this would be where I give them a paragraph and they have to use a highlighting tool to show me that they can identify a citation in a paragraph. that really is giving us that core fundamental before they get into writing it themselves.
Mm.
So now as we get into our level 2, you could choose to either continue with that citation concept and have them do a little bit more with it, or they can get into some of these other targets. So I just felt like that was a background knowledge piece we wanted to add. Where do you feel like you want to get into for level 2 now that we're back to level 2?
Well, I do like that idea of bridging it, like the citation, like between 1 and 2.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be, even though they've been exposed to it and they've practiced it a little bit, I think really expecting it of them now is going to be very difficult.
Yep.
And working on that as much as we can,
Yep.
I think would be a really smart thing to help scaffold that more.
I think so too. And depending again on how you introduce the idea and have them engage with the idea, you're just leveling up that concept by saying, okay,
Mhm.
now that you've identified it, let's get into like looking at this content, applying it a little bit in level 2. So I agree. Let's bring your citation into 2A.
Okay.
Content specific vocabulary is on here. Perfect. So I think you can still have kept your target in level 2 about citations, just so you know. Because I think that you had brought it down to level 1. We can still keep it as a target in level 2 as well. We'll just do it at a deeper level.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then vocabulary, explain how details support the main idea, and then summarizing. So I think I agree. I think you had said this earlier, getting into some of that summarizing, or I think I would do summarizing before details, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would, from those citations, I think moving into summarizing is a very natural flow. I agree. And again, as we're getting into these pieces, you can still be teaching these concepts and having them do some of this work themselves. So as we go through, we might have them identify their research topic in level 2 as we get there, but these are important pieces to do first.
Mm-hmm.
And then explain how details supporting the main idea of nonfiction piece of writing. I think that's a great natural movement. And then you have here, I can use specific content vocabulary in a different way. What do you mean by that, Target?
So I was thinking about not just identifying vocabulary and defining it. My students do that all the time. I was thinking about, okay, so if they know vocabulary, I was trying to think about how do I approach this at a higher level, right? Mm-hmm. Well, the higher level of that is, okay, I know it, I can identify it. Okay, how do I, to make sure that my students really know the vocabulary, I have them use it in a different way. So sometimes it's simply like, okay, we'll take that word and use it in a different sentence.
Sure.
Or sometimes I'll give them sentences in a word bank of the vocabulary words that we've been working on. I do this a lot in social studies, where I'll take a different word or a different sentence than where we've used it as an example, and have them plug it in to the sentence as well. So is
this something that you feel like you can sprinkle into this in multiple different areas of the grid, or do you want to have one specific focus section on this target?
I'd like to have a specific focus on this target just because vocabulary, this is actually reaching into like reading and other content areas.
Yeah.
And vocabulary is so crucial to fluency and comprehension.
Right.
And so I think having a focus on it in my classroom, having a focus on building vocabulary is really important.
Perfect. So when we're looking at building vocabulary, do you want that to be after they've summarized, after they're getting into understanding that main idea, or does that even come maybe before summarizing? And you do that maybe between the citation? Where do you feel like that best fits, depending on how we can always move these things around later too.
Yeah. It probably does fit before summarizing.
I would probably shift B and C over 1 and probably fit that after the citation, only because I think that it's going to be a very natural flow, kind of getting into the pieces again, the pieces of the writing, and then really getting into putting it all together, like the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about. And we can always switch these up later. I'm just thinking through your flow of kind of the concepts.
Mhm.
I wonder if at the end of level 2, because you've exposed them to so many examples of writing, we've been asking them to engage with this writing as we continue to bring those in, build on those fundamentals. Now they're actually getting into applying some of those pieces. This might be a good spot for them to identify what they want to research. So at the end of level 2, they've been exposed to a lot of examples of what they're going to be working on, and then they've made their decision now of how they want to do this on their own. So as you get into level 3, they can be applying these concepts to their choice of topic, and you can approve that before they get into level 3, before they level up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that.
And I think that really sets them up for success as you get into your level 3 targets, where you're getting into comparing and contrasting appropriate sources and really looking at different things. They can actually be modeling those targets while working with their own specific area, depending on how you want to do that.
Okay.
So we're actually running out of time here, but how are you feeling with how this grid's being written so far?
Good.
Yeah?
I do. I feel really comfortable. Feel really comfortable with it. If I had one question, it's that my level 4 is obviously, I can write an informative text, right? But it's a really huge long sentence. And I guess my question was, did I do too much in that sentence? What I did was if you went back up and looked, I underlined where I took wording directly out of the standard and put it into my targets.
Yep.
And that's what I did for this. I'm like, okay, so at the end of 5th grade, this is what they should be able to do, right? And it's that, but I'm like, that looks very large to me.
So I think there's an important differentiation we need to look here, where just because the target is long doesn't mean that that is literally the only point where they do that target. And I'm sorry if that was unclear, but just because the target says, okay, this is the big shebang, they've done all these things, they actually can be putting together pieces of that at lower levels, which is what I was trying to explain before.
Yeah.
They can be writing their introduction in level 3, but actually compiling everything together and evaluating how each piece moves to the next in level 4. That is still a higher level skill. They don't have to begin those processes at level 4 just because our target's written that way. So I think that's the kind of the biggest difference. And sometimes what I see in a writing grid is sometimes we get to the big end of meeting the grade level standard, and that's when we finally put it all together. In a writing grid, you can actually put your pieces together as you go. And then now when they get to that level at end of level 3 or get to that beginning of level 4, now they have all these pieces and now they're constructing it. And so just because they're constructing it doesn't mean that they don't have those pieces already solidified for them, which is looking at your grid. I am seeing a lot of work needing to be done in level 3, where they take their research concept and they're really putting these pieces together. I really see in level 4, especially with that long target, you're going to hand them essentially their puzzle pieces that they've already created, and you're going to be asking them to click those puzzle pieces together in level 4.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, total sense. Yes, absolutely.
So as you are looking at your grid, do you feel like you're in a good spot to keep building and constructing all these pieces on your own?
Yeah, I do. Or at least doing as much and then calling up my new BFF Ray and being like, I need help.
And I said this to Karen off air yesterday after she had been live with me, but I was like, get working on this and then email me. I will totally take a look at it. And it's so much easier to look at someone else's grid when you've gone through some of these beginning questions and discussions, because now when you send me the grid, I won't be like, okay, Marie, what's your standards you're working on? How did you get here? Why is it constructed this way? But I'm going to be able to really give you feedback. And there are a lot of layers of types of feedback you might want on your grid. You might send it to me and say, okay, does this flow work? It's like, yeah, I really agree with the flow. And then you might send it back to me a few weeks later and say, okay, now I've added in the checkpoints of when I'm going to look at my students and they're going to meet with me versus just getting feedback maybe separate from meeting with me, how does that look? And there's so many different ways to look at this grid. So I would love to see it later. I hope that you do reach out. That's going to be important.
Yeah. I've
You,
been very pumped up to like with these live, like with these like building live. I've been like really pumped up and like re-inspired.
good. No, that's the point. That's totally the goal.
Can I circle back to something very quick that
Absolutely. And then I do want to address Holly's comment too.
Sorry. So Alex said he wants to build a PD grid.
Yeah.
And for anybody else who would like to build a PD grid, Brianne Fennell has built PD grids and used them in PD. So I'm going to shout out my girl and say, you need to hit her up if you need like advice.
Yeah, Brianne is incredible. She was not only an incredible ambassador, but now a member of the Teach Better team. We love all Bree's energy and insight that she shares. And she's been in the comments too. So I hope that there's some collaboration going on. Holly's comment here says, I'm totally guilty of making super long, complex looking targets and sentences. Yeah, Marie, I just think her comments really emphasizing that sometimes when we're drafting, things look messy, but it doesn't mean that they're incorrect. Just keep them messy for a while. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Marie, I do want to thank you for joining our Build a Grid. I know I feel like we kind of ran out of time, but I think that we got some really good discussion going in that level 1, level 2, and set you up for success for level 3. So I'm so excited to see what your grid looks like. And I really appreciate you coming live to talk shop with me about writing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to like work on this in real time, and bounce ideas off of somebody else like while I'm doing it. And
it's so helpful. I love it. I'm so glad that you chose to come live. For everybody else, it is New Year's Eve. And while I'm so appreciative that you were here with us, we also want to wish you a wonderful, wonderful evening of celebration and beginning of 2022. As a reminder, every single session that we've had all week for our Build a Grid series, which was Monday through Friday, this week specifically, in place of our daily drop-in, you can catch the audio over on Teach Better Talk podcast, just like normal. But you can also go to our academy, teachbetteracademy.com, and we are going to save all these together. So you can actually watch Monday through Friday without having to hunt for them. They'll be saved in there for you to watch as many times as you need. And obviously reach out to Chad and I or anyone else on the team, including Brianne, who's in the comments, so that we can help you as you are beginning your journey. As a reminder also, if you have not checked your email, this Build a Grid series we love doing, but we know that we want to do it more often. And there is a brand new webinar that we just announced that is completely free. And it's going to be focusing on the first 5 steps to building your grid. If you are somebody who's looking to start with the grid method, if you liked this Build a Grid series, that webinar might be a really good option for you. You can register for that over at teachbetter.com/grid webinar, teachbetter.com/grid webinar. You can register, again, completely free. It's a few hours Q&A with the one and only Chad Ershowski on January 14th. I'd love to see so many of you not only choosing to participate in that, but bring a friend, bring a buddy, expose them to the work we've been able to do all week. And it should be just a good time to hop on a Zoom call and get some specific questions answered so that you feel confident getting started. Marie, I want to thank you again for joining us bright and early. And hopefully for everybody else, everybody joins us on Monday as we kick off 2022 together Monday morning for Daily Drop-In, just like normal, returning on Mondays through Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern. So it's been a blast. But again, Marie, thank you so much for taking the time with me.
Absolutely.
All right. For everybody, Happy New Year. We will see you a little later. Happy New Year. Thank you for all that you do. I know it's been a hell of a year, but it's going to be even better. And we are so appreciative of our incredible family and community. So thank you for all that you do. Happy New Year. We'll see you later, friends.